Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I'm Professor Kalman Weiser of York University, a member of the Departments of History and Humanities, and I'm also the Associate Director of the Center for Jewish Studies at York. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you to hear this morning from Elly Gotz, a Holocaust survivor from Lithuania, about his experiences before and during the war and afterwards. Before we get to hear from Elly, I'd just like to say a few words. It's my distinct pleasure to say that this event today is co-sponsored by the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Professional Studies at York, and also by the Israel and Golda Koshitsky Center for Jewish Studies at York. You can find out more about the center at our website. I'll allow you to Google that, but it's basically cjs.yorku.ca. The center sponsors events like this one throughout the year, and it also makes scholarships and grants available to students for study during the summer and during the regular academic year around the world. It's with great excitement that we're going to be hearing from Elly Gotz this morning. As I was telling him earlier, I read his memoir with great interest, in part because it parallels the story of my wife's family, as well as some of the things that I research. And it's quite a riveting story in itself, and I'm sure you'll agree once you hear from him. The other thing I'd like to mention before we go any further is that you'll have the opportunity to ask questions, that is. Please send your questions via the chat function. This event will also be recorded and will be posted later, I believe on the website of the Center for Jewish Studies, but we'll let you know. And without any further ado, I will now introduce my colleague, Professor Deborah Neal, Professor of History specializing in Germany, Central Europe, and History of Medicine from York University. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Weiser. I'm so thrilled as I see people still coming in, so many of our students and other members of the York community. And I want to thank Elly Gotz for doing this for us. It's very exciting. But my job is to introduce Annette Metz, who is our community partner and help facilitate this lecture today. A few years ago, my husband had the opportunity to get to know a wonderful, brave, and kind gentleman named George Metz. He was born in Poland and was only 10 years old when the Nazis invaded in 1939. And he survived miraculously the horrors of the Holocaust and many hardships and emigrated to Canada in 1951. But tragedy reached him here too. His beloved wife died and he found himself raising two young daughters on his own. And his resiliency and courage is reflected in the amazing daughters he raised, one of whom is Annette Metz, who is here today and is a dear friend of mine. Annette is an incredible person. She's dedicated a considerable amount of time and energy over many years to help Holocaust survivors share their experiences with a wide range of audiences. Our own partnership began 2 years ago when she arranged to have the incredible survivor Martin Maxwell speak to my third-year World War II students. And his presentation was electrifying, and Annette and I knew how crucial it was to continue the work. COVID has, of course, presented some challenges, but Annette is ambitious and she began a plan to persuade Elly Gotz to come and present to us, and happily she was successful and he is here with us today. And Annette, I would like to ask you to do the honor of introducing our esteemed speaker, and I want to extend a heartfelt thanks to him for honoring us with his talk and to you for the ongoing work you do. And I look forward to ongoing partnerships between us and the Center for Jewish Studies and the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Professional Studies here at York. So Annette, over to you.
Thank you so much for your very kind and generous words, Professor Neal. Good morning, faculty and students. My name is Annette Metz. It is an honor to be here this morning. I would like to extend an enormous thank you to Professors Kalman Weiser, David Kaufman, Carl Ehrlich, and Deborah Neal, who have made this event possible. Professor Neal has asked me to say a few words about volunteering. I have always thought that a very important part of being a community is to give back in a meaningful way, no matter what it is. Volunteering allows one to connect to community and make it a better place. It can benefit you as much as the cause you choose to help. Dedicating your time as a volunteer can help you make new friends, expand your network, and enhance your social skills. It has greatly enriched my life, and I view it as a privilege. I volunteered for the Holocaust Center of Toronto for 30 years, bringing survivors to schools to share their stories with students. I chose to be involved with Holocaust education as my father was a survivor. It was a way to honor my dad, my family, the 6 million Jews, and the millions of others who perished. My dad was not comfortable sharing his story publicly. I felt that I had a responsibility to facilitate as many stories as possible to help educate and create awareness about the horrific events that took place during the Holocaust. In the next 10 years, unfortunately, there will no longer be any survivors. It is up to family and students to continue telling these stories, to remind ourselves to never let it happen again, not only to the Jewish community, but to any community. Education is key. Elie Wiesel, a very famous Holocaust survivor, once said, "The opposite of hate is not love, it is indifference." I believe that when anyone is suffering, when any community is threatened, even with genocide, each one of us has a responsibility to speak up in protest or in solidarity with them. The world would be a better place if we all were to speak out against intolerance, racism, and hatred. We are all connected. I find this has become even more evident during the past year of living through COVID. There is a Hebrew phrase, tikkun olam, which refers to a concept in Judaism for repairing the world. We all need to take personal responsibility for creating a more just world, alleviating human suffering, and for fixing a world in need of so much healing. Our incredible speaker today is Mr. Elly Gotz. Elly Gotz is a survivor of the ghetto Kovno in Lithuania and the Dachau concentration camp. He was only 17 when he was liberated by the American army in 1945. After the war, Elly lived in Germany, Norway, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. He came to Canada in 1964 with his wife and 3 children. Elly is an electrical engineer, a businessman, a pilot, and an author. He built a very successful business in Toronto. He was the president of a synagogue and supported many, many causes. Elly has served on the boards of Miles for Millions and Holocaust Remembrance Committee of the Christian-Jewish Dialogue, and he is very active at the Holocaust Center of Toronto, where I met him. He is a regular speaker at schools and universities about his experience in the Holocaust and the need for tolerance in society. Elly and his wife Esme have transcribed over 450 recorded interviews with Holocaust survivors living in Toronto. They are an important piece of history describing the Holocaust as well as the way of life and customs of the Jewish communities in Europe prior to the war. It is now my honor and my privilege to introduce Mr. Elly Gotz. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Annette Metz, thank you for the kind introduction. I am happy to speak to you today, even though we are all locked up. We are locked up in the apartments, in the houses, but I've been locked up much worse. It's not too bad now. After all, they bring us the groceries to our home. We can survive. I want to start by remembering a lockup that was quite different. Ghetto Kovno, Lithuania, 1944. 3 years we have lived in the ghetto once the German occupation of Lithuania occurred. And after 3 years, from 30,000 people, Jews, there were only left 8,000 of us. Now the war changed. The Russian army was winning the war. They were pushing the Germans out of Russia. And now the front was very close to our city, to Kaunas. We could hear the guns. What will happen to us now? The Russian army will come, drive the Germans out. But what will happen to us in the meantime? And the Nazis, when I say Nazi, I mean the National Socialist Party of Germany. The Nazis announced, we are liquidating the ghetto and we are taking you guys somewhere else to work. We did not believe them. To us, the word liquidation meant one thing. They are going to walk us up the hill and shoot us with machine guns like they did the rest. Our family had a meeting. We decided we are not going where they want to take us. We will hide, and if they find us, we will commit suicide. So we went down into the basement of our house. We lived in a 2-story large house. We had one room there, my family, my parents and I, but I had uncles and aunts also living there. And we all decided we are going to find a hiding place in the basement. We went down, the cement basement had rooms, storage rooms. And we opened the first door and we found old furniture and junk. We took it out, we cleaned it up, we brought water and food to last us about 2 weeks. Then we dragged the heavy cupboard in front of the door, so it shouldn't be obvious over the door there. And we crawled through the cupboard. We broke the back of the cupboard and we crawled into our room. My 3 uncles, my aunt, my parents, and I. And once we got inside, everyone turned to my mother. Sonia, are you ready? My mother was a nurse. She was assisting in operations at the hospital in the ghetto. And my mother replied, yes, I'm ready to commit suicide. She laid out a tray with a white cloth, very clean, and on it she had a number of syringes lying there filled with a drug, a brown drug. And she explained, this drug, we give it to older people when their heart is beating too slow to speed it up. I will give everyone a large dose of this drug. It will make the heart race and stop, create a heart attack. Are you sure it will work? We asked her. I'm sure. I've asked the surgeon and he told me a large dose would kill. My mother is working. She's laying out everything and I'm watching her. I'm 16 year old. After 3 years in the ghetto, I sometimes watched my mother working in the surgery and at home as a nurse. She is taking a bit of cotton wool and puts it on each syringe. And she puts a bottle of alcohol on the side. I've seen her do it before. I'm thinking, Mother, I said, this is the last injection. We are not afraid of dying of an infection. Forget the cotton wool and the alcohol. Everybody laughed except my mother. She said, I've been doing it like that all my life. But she took away the cotton wool and the alcohol. I was 16-year-old. I'm sitting there on a hard chair wondering, what's it like to die of a heart attack? Doesn't the brain go on longer after the heart stops for a while? That must be feeling pain. I didn't know what would happen, what it's like. I thought, I'm going first. You see, I'm an only child. I always come first. Actually, I wanted to go first because I was afraid I don't want to watch my family die. They might be rolling on the floor, screaming in pain. I don't know what will happen, what a heart attack is like. I will go first. We sat for 3 long days and nights in this room, locked up. No window. We don't know what's going on outside. On the 4th morning, 2 soldiers are coming down the stairs. We can hear them. They come down, they push past our cupboard, they go to the end of the passage, kick in the door of the coal shed, open another room, have a look. They are coming back. They are standing next to our cupboard, talking. My mother is holding a syringe in her hand, and I've got my arm out. I'm ready. If they start moving the cupboard, she will inject me. They are talking. One of them opens the door of the room opposite where we stuck the furniture. And he comes back and tells the other one, there are no Jews here, just furniture. Let's go. And they walked out. My mother put away the syringe. We are sitting again, listening. 2 days, 3 days. I can't remember. It was endless. Day and night looks the same. And suddenly one of my uncles speaks up. He says, you know, I was lying on the floor, by the way, on a blanket. I couldn't sit on a hard chair anymore. My uncle says, I think the Russians must be here already. They were just outside the city. How long can it take them to drive out the Germans? We could be free already, but we are sitting here. Nobody will come and tell us to come out. Nobody knows we are here. Let's go out and have a look. I think the Russians must be here already. We crawled through the cupboard and we went outside. And we see the Nazi guards, the soldiers are still there. And now people are marching to a train. A train? They don't need a train to walk us up the hill to the 9th fort and shoot us. Perhaps they didn't lie to us. Perhaps they are really taking us somewhere to work. We went to the train. What happened in the ghetto in those few years that would make a woman like my mother a nurse willing to kill her family and herself? And that is the story of Kovno ghetto. I will show you a few pictures now. And just a moment. It all started on the 17th of June, 1941. Barbarossa, it was called, the German attack on the Soviet Union. Here is Lithuania, here is Poland before the war started, Germany, and here's Russia. And we are in between, a little country, 2.5 million people. And when the war started, the Germans occupied the half of Poland that they didn't have yet. A year before, they occupied half of Poland and half of it was taken by Russia. Now they occupy the rest, Lithuania, Russia. 3 months later, the Germans occupied a huge part of Russia. They had the whole of Europe. Norway in the north, all of Europe, France fell, Italy was a partner, all the southern Europe from Greece to Hungary and Romania, even part of North Africa was occupied by Germany. Before the war, I lived a normal life. I was an only child. My mother worked in a hospital as a nurse in the surgery. My father worked in a bank as a bookkeeper. He wanted to be an engineer, but the First World War interrupted his studies. So after 2 years in St. Petersburg, he had to come back to Lithuania. And he was a bookkeeper. And I went to school. I enjoyed school. I loved school. I had a good time in school. I liked especially mathematics, physics, science. And here, at the age of 13, I graduated from grade 6. I was ready to go to high school. For us, high school was 7 to 12. In the spring of 1941, I got this beautiful uniform, a black uniform with a tight collar. I was very proud of it. I never got to wear that uniform because the war broke out. I never went to high school. Now at 13, I had a dream. When I grow up, I want to be an engineer, build machines, build airplanes, and I want to be a pilot. I want to fly an airplane one day. That was my dream. I was very interested in aeronautics. I was building model aeroplanes all the time, fly them in school, fly them outdoors. I'm going to be an engineer and a pilot. Now, if I was 13 in 1941, how old am I now? For those of you who might be mathematically challenged, I am now 93. So the school never came because in the summer of 1941, on the 17th of June, Germany attacked our country and the Soviet Union. And very soon there was an attack on the Jews. Some Lithuanian local people hated Jews, they were anti-Semites. They mounted themselves with white armbands, they took a rifle and they went out and they were now the police. The police was gone. They grabbed Jews in the street, they tied them up with a rope, they robbed them and they killed them. It was dangerous to go out in the street. The first 6 weeks of the German occupation of Lithuania, they formed a provisional government of Nazi Lithuanians. And the first law they passed was, the Jews are not citizens of Lithuania. We have lived in Lithuania for 800 years, and suddenly we were no longer citizens. They grabbed people in the street, they locked them up, they decided to form a kind of concentration camp. They learned from Germany. They locked them up in one place in the middle of the city. It was Fort number 7, and over 6,000 Jews were murdered under the most awful circumstances in that fort in the first 6 weeks. But then the Germans took over. They cancelled and dismissed the provisional government, and after that we were under German control. The provisional government passed rules. The Jews mustn't walk on the sidewalk, they must walk in the gutter. They mustn't come out to shop until 5 o'clock in the evening, 4 o'clock. 6 o'clock they have to be locked up at home, and so forth. They even started to ask us to wear a yellow Star of David before the Germans did. But then the Germans took over and they said, the Jews, we hate the Jews. If anybody shoots a German soldier, we will shoot 200 Jews. They didn't say that it has to be a Jew who shot the German soldier. The Jews were guilty a priori. And then they announced, we are taking the Jews out of society. We are putting them in a ghetto. They took an old part of town, surrounded it with barbed wire, soldiers. 6,000 Lithuanian Catholics had to move out, and 30,000 Jews move into the same place. Crowded conditions. We got one small room in the house. Immediately as we settled down, the Nazis announced, we are coming door to door. You must hand over all your valuables, gold, silver, money, everything you have, jewelry. Don't hide it. If we find it, we will kill you on the spot. 2 soldiers marched into our little room. They filled the room, put on the table all your valuables. My father, with shaking hands, took out his money from his pocket. My mother brought her jewelry. She brought a pair of silver candlesticks. We were not wealthy people. Have you got cameras? My father had a camera. Bring it here. What about furs? My mother brought her only fur. They took it all away. One man was standing there writing down what they stole from us. Then he asked us for our surname, wrote it on top, and gave us a copy. They gave us a receipt. They robbed us and they gave us a receipt. Much value had the receipt. After that came another order. You must hand over all your books. Bring them to the collection center. Gold and silver my family didn't have, but books, we had a lot of books. My father loved books. In the city, when we lived in the Kovno there, he was buying a book every week. He didn't have much money, but one book he could afford. He had a big library. I used to go with him to the library to borrow books and to the shop to buy books. Every week he used to come with a book. Now, when we moved into the ghetto, my father packed all his books in cartons, and he insisted that all the books have to come with him to the ghetto. My mother was not happy. She said, we have to take other things she wanted to take. No, the books can't stay. The books have to come. So we carried the heavy boxes into the ghetto. We were not allowed to rent a truck, only a horse and wagon or carry. The farmers, the peasants used to come into the city with their horse and wagon, and they got paid good money to help the Jews move into the ghetto with their some furniture and so on. Now, we were living in a very small room. There was no place to unpack the books. They were lying by one wall, lined up in the cartons. My dad has to give up the books. He was very upset. He picked out some less important books, a couple of them from his library, put them in a wheelbarrow, and he and I went with a wheelbarrow to deliver the books to the collection center, which turned out to be a local synagogue, a little synagogue. They ripped out all the benches from the synagogue and threw them in the yard, and they told everybody, throw the books on the floor. When we arrived by noontime, we were not hurrying there, you know, we are not rushing. An amazing sight greeted us. There were books from the floor till halfway up the wall, a mountain of books, and people were coming in and climbing on the mountain and falling and slipping on the books and dropping more books. I saw all kinds of scenes there. I saw an old man come with a Gemara, and he kissed it, and he put it carefully on the floor, and tears were coming down his eyes. My father looks around, and he says to me, Elie, you notice? With the books, they trust us. There are no soldiers. Nobody's watching us. He says, I'm going to have a look. And he bends down, and he picks up a couple of books, and he looks, and he turns them over, and he puts them down again, and he shakes his head. And then he picks up 2 volumes, and there were more on the floor. Look at this, he says. Pushkin, the greatest Russian poet. He died in 1838. In 1938, the Russians published 5 volumes. It was called the Gold Edition. My father says, the Gold Edition. I always wanted to buy it, and I couldn't afford it. You know what Elie says? Take out our books from the wheelbarrow and leave them here. They are not so valuable. And I'll take Pushkin and I'll take it home. And he puts it in a wheelbarrow. Then he walks around further and he picks up another 2 volumes. Gretz, Geschichte der Juden. Gretz was a great German historian, and he wrote 2 volumes, The History of the Jews. I remember it like that. He put it in, that's a good set. The long and the short, my father picked the best books he could find. After a while, I said, Dad, I can't take any more. The wheelbarrow is full. Okay, cover it with a newspaper. We are going home. And we went home with a heavy wheelbarrow full of books. And we went back 7 times. We went back empty and we came back full. We stole a massive second library of the best books my father could find. My mother was screaming, what are you doing? You are stealing books. You want them to come and kill us. That's what you want. Don't worry, said my father, because you couldn't walk through in the room. There were books on the bed, on the table, on the floor. He says, don't worry. We'll hide them. We are not keeping them in the house. There's no place anyway. Elie said to me, climb up the ladder in the shed and put them on the ceiling in the shed. Outside the house was a garden shed, an old garden shed. And on the rafters, there were boards like a ceiling. He said, put them up there. If anybody finds them, we don't know who put them there. Slowly, I carried all the books up there. Slowly, I brought them up. And that was, I had the library. I made bookshelves. I took boards and bricks and I laid them out. And I sorted my library. And I had the Library of Europe in front of me in 4 languages. Yiddish was the language I spoke at home. My parents spoke to me Yiddish when I was born, my tongue. Yiddish is the language of the Jews of Eastern Europe, Poland, Russia, Lithuania. It sounds a little bit like German, but it's written with Hebrew letters from right to left. I spoke Lithuanian. When I went downstairs to play with the kids, I spoke Lithuanian perfectly, the language of the country. And I knew the literature as well as the Yiddish literature very well. When my parents wanted to talk to each other that I shouldn't understand, they spoke Russian. They were educated in Russian. Russia was occupying Lithuania for 150 years before the First World War. So they went to Russian high school. My father studied engineering in Russian in St. Petersburg. They spoke Russian, so I shouldn't understand. How long do you think it took me to learn Russian? No time at all. The best way to learn a foreign language if your parents don't want you to understand. I understood Russian perfectly. I kept quiet. I didn't tell them. When I was 10 years old, they were amazed. They discovered the kid speaks Russian. What a miracle. I also spoke German. We had a lot of German refugees, Jewish refugees, run away from Hitler. They came to our city. They lived with us. I heard a lot of German, and I learned it at school. Now I had the library of Russian and German literature. My Yiddish literature library, we never gave up. I had all the Yiddish classics and Shalom Aleichem and Mendele Mochas in Peretz. I knew that well. But I didn't know Russian and German literature. That was my chance. Everybody had to go to work. They gave an order. People from the age of 15 to the age of 65 have to go to work every morning, men and women, present themselves at the gate of the ghetto, and they were taken away. We need 200 people to dig ditches on the road. We need 50 people to wash the floors of the hospital. We need 2,000 people to build a new airport. And people went out every morning. It was controlled. You couldn't stay home. I was 13. I didn't have to go. So I went upstairs and I started reading. There was no school for me. The Germans said no schools for Jews. That was my schooling. I learned the Russian literature really well. I learned how to read Russian well. I got to know Pushkin's poems, and I still remember them now. Beautiful poetry. I read Tolstoy, Anna Karenina, War and Peace, all the famous books. I read the German literature. I read the modern Russian writers. Zoschenko, I read everything. Maxim Gorky. I read the German. Goethe, Schiller, Heine, the poets. I discovered the German poet Hauptmann, a modern poet whom I liked. Then I discovered he was a big Nazi. Well, that was my education. I learned while people went to work. Life settled down in the ghetto. It became quiet, and after a while, people got used to life. It was a tough life. There was a shortage of food at first, but later we managed to get more food ourselves. We used to buy it from peasants secretly and bring it into the ghetto. And life went on. August, September, October, we were in the ghetto already, 1941. End of October, an announcement. Nobody goes to work tomorrow. Everybody has to gather in a big open field in the middle of the ghetto, called Democracy Place, out of all things. Don't stay home. Leave the doors open, they said. If we find anybody at home, they will be shot on the spot. We all went out. 30,000 people went out to the field, not knowing what awaits us. 8 o'clock in the morning, an officer came in, stood on a dais on a big curtain there, and he announced, everybody walk past me in families. This family, back to the ghetto. This family, go and stand outside by the fence. By the fence were soldiers guarding them. They couldn't run away. Left, right, the whole day it took. 6 o'clock in the evening, he was finally finished. When he was finished, a third of the ghetto stood outside the fence. My family were back in the ghetto. 10,000 people standing outside. They kept them there the night, and in the morning, they drove them away. Soldiers came with dogs, and they were chasing them up the hill away from the ghetto toward the 9th Fort. The 9th Fort was a military compound surrounded with stone walls where soldiers used to practice shooting and marching, a very big place. And there on the 9th Fort, on the 29th of October, 1941, 10,000 men, women, and children and old people were murdered with machine guns in one day, and their bodies were thrown in long trenches that were dug before. Some people didn't get shot, they were missed. They were thrown into the trench together with the dead bodies. At night, they crawled out and they came back to the ghetto covered with blood. And they said, everybody dead up there. So we knew that's the fate that expected for us too. 10,000, a third of our people. Who was the man who was in charge of that whole operation? His name is well known to Canadians because he lived here in Canada, in Ontario, for 32 years before he was found. Helmut Raucher, a war criminal. A war criminal is a person that killed civilians during the war. The Germans sent out lists with all the war criminals that ran away from Germany. They went to Argentina by the thousands. They were helped by the Red Cross. They were helped by the Vatican, some of them. They went to America. They went to Canada. Canada took in over 150, I believe. Nothing happened to them. They lived a peaceful life. The Germans sent out lists to every police force. Find these people, bring them to us, send them to us. We want to try them in court. Nothing happened in Canada. You see, the prime minister at the time, the father of our present prime minister, Trudeau, he said to the RCMP, to the Royal Mounted Police, don't look for them. We have here Germans and Jews and Ukrainians and Russians and Poles, and there will be an argument about who did what to whom. We don't want to bring European arguments to Canada. Don't look for them. So they didn't. That man, he lived in Huntsville. He bought a motel. He had a lot of money, our money. When they took our money, they kept some for themselves. He bought a motel and he ran a hotel for many years. I've met people who knew him. Then he retired. He sold the motel. He moved to Toronto and he bought a house not far from where I lived, in Toronto, York Mills and Bayview area. Lived in peace. All of them lived in peace. All the war criminals that came to Canada. They had grandchildren here. They were fine. No problem. That guy, finally they found him in 1982. They put him to court. If I knew that they are looking for him, I could have found him in 5 minutes. His name was in the phone book in Toronto under his own name. The RCMP couldn't find him for 32 years. Anyway, they found him, they put him in court, and the judge said, the Germans state reports that he's charged with 11,584 murders. He should be tried here in Canada. He's a Canadian citizen. In fact, this is his passport photo I have here. We don't know anything about this man, the judge said. Send him to Germany. They know what he did. Let them try him. He was sent out to Germany, the only war criminal in Canada who was ever deported. He stayed in jail. He went to hospital. He died of cancer 8 months later. No court case. And how do we know that 10,000 people were killed under the management of this man? Because we have a document. This document is called the Jaeger Report, Einsatzkommando 3. And I have here a copy of this report. It's a multi-page report listing line by line every murder of Jews in Lithuania in the first 5 months of the war. Between July 2nd, 1941 to December, they killed in 92 executions, which are listed line by line. They killed a total of 137,346 Jews. 2/3 of the 200,000 Jews of Lithuania were killed in the first 5 months of the war, before Auschwitz, before gas chambers, before all the other historical facts that we know. They were dead already. The whole province of Lithuania was wiped of Jews, city by city, town by town, village by village. And here's an excerpt from this report. On the 29th of October, 1941, in Kaunas, on the 9th fort, 207 Jewish men, 920 women, and 4,200 children. Total 9,200. They made an arithmetical error. This should be 9,300. What's 100 Jews more or less? And here's an explanation. Why did they kill them? Removal from the ghetto of surplus Jews. They had too many, though they had to kill us. Even now, while we, the last survivors, are still around, there are people in Canada and in the world who deny the Holocaust. They say it's not true, the Jews made up the story. They didn't kill 6 million. When I came to Canada in 1964, a couple of years later, there was a guy here, Zundel, who wrote a book, Did 6 Million Really Die? He was a German national. He was deported from Canada. He was German, but I don't know if he was born here or not. I don't think so. Anyway, he was writing and publicizing the denial of the Holocaust. They sent him to Germany, and there they arrested him, and there was a whole long story. Eventually, he died there. How do we know that these people are lying? Because we have all the documents. Here is the Holocaust denial, a Canadian, Monica Schaefer, a musician from Alberta. She referred to the Holocaust as the biggest and most pernicious and persistent lie in the whole of history. She can talk what she likes, free speech in Canada. As long as she doesn't say, go and kill the rest of the Jews here, she's okay. She was a Green Party candidate for Alberta. She wanted to be a politician in the government. I ask everyone when I speak, please don't believe the Holocaust deniers. I understand she's of German origin and she's not happy that Germany is accused of having murdered so many people. But history is history and facts are facts. The Holocaust is the best recorded event, genocide in history. What else happened in the ghetto? They formed a school. The Jews asked permission from the Nazis to establish a trade school for children from 12 to 15, like me, to teach us a trade so we could be useful later, they said. and the Germans gave permission for a trade school, not a regular school, a trade school. They formed a trade school, and I joined the school. I joined the metalwork school. We also had a woodworking school, and for the girls, we had sewing and knitting and working sewing machines. I learned metalwork. I became a locksmith. I learned how to fix locks and keys, how to make locks, how to build, repair locks. I learned everything about locks, starting with door locks and ending with safes. I learned how to weld. I learned how to cut metal. I learned how to heat metal in fire and bend it. I learned shaping metal, measuring very precisely, working a lathe to cut metal. I loved it. I was a good student. I used to admire our teacher. We had one teacher, Feldman. He was a master in handwork, mechanical work, fine mechanics. I used to watch him using a chisel and a hammer. And he used to hit the chisel with a hammer with great force, a heavy hammer, 2-kilogram hammer. And I used to watch him. He wasn't looking where he's hitting, so he shouldn't hit his hand. He used to look where the chisel is cutting and hit without looking. I tried to imitate him, and I hit my hand many times. I had wounds on my hand, but I learned it. To this day, I don't have to look where I'm hitting. I know exactly where I'm hitting. I used to admire Feldman tremendously. One day I was standing with my fellow students watching him work with a chisel, and I said to them, you know, it looks to me like piff, puff, pui, boom, chick, chuck, echo of the metal. I only said it once. Immediately, my nickname became piff, puff, pui, boom, chick, chuck. They were not lazy. They used it every time. Nicknames stuck to me all my life. I was Piff Puff Pui Bom Chik Chak. After 2 years, when I was 15, I graduated from the school. I was a good student. They offered me to become a teacher. I became a teacher. I had 2 classes, morning and afternoon, about 25 kids, younger than me, teaching them metalwork. Here in Canada, many years later, I went with my wife to Washington, D.C. We visited the Holocaust Museum of the United States. It's a wonderful institution. We were standing upstairs and we were looking at slides from ghetto Kovno. There were other slides from all over Europe, different centers. So I stood at ours and I told my wife, I recognized this is the place where they sorted us, and this is the building where the management was. Oh, that was the building of the school, I said. And the next picture, I said, that's a student of mine. I remember the kid, such a nice kid. He is working here on the lathe, which I taught him to use to cut metal. You see, he's wearing a yellow Star of David. We had to wear a yellow star front and back on our clothes all the time. I said to my wife, I'm sorry, I'm sure he didn't survive. He was younger than I was. And then came a next picture. And I was amazed. I said, Esme, look, that's me. I found my own pictures there. This guy with the black hair in the middle, make no mistake, that's me. Wow. I went to management. I said, please, I want a copy of that picture. This is my picture. They gave me a copy. They asked me, do I remember the names of these boys? You see, they are all wearing yellow Stars of David. I said, I don't remember, but I don't think they survived. They were younger than I was, and I barely made it. I took the picture home. I showed it to everybody in Toronto, my friends. The only picture I have of the war, of myself. I remember it was taken by a brave guy, an engineer in the ghetto. He kept his camera, and he came in one day, he opened his jacket, there was a camera. I said, oh, they are going to hang him and I'll have to come and watch, which happened. He said, don't look at me. If they find the picture, I don't want them to know that you knew that I'm photographing you. He took a picture, he disappeared. He buried the pictures in the ground. He survived the war. He came back in the ghetto. He hid with a farmer. He came back, he dug it up, and he sent it to Israel. And from Israel, it went to Washington. I got my picture. I brought it home. The Star newspaper heard about the picture. I was showing it all my friends. They came to interview me. I had a whole page in the Star with my story. It so happens that a Jewish teacher from Tel Aviv, from Israel, was visiting Toronto that day. He saw the picture in the paper. He said, I have a friend from ghetto Kovno. He took it in the newspaper. 2 weeks later, I got a message, a letter. Ellie, I'm that guy here. I remember you. We were in the school together. You were teaching me. You were my teacher. Where are you from? Tel Aviv. What do you think I did? I flew to Tel Aviv. I had to meet him. And here I'm sitting next to him. And we are having lunch. I invited him for lunch. And he brought 2 other guys. And he said to me, Ellie, thank you very much. You taught me so well. You were so enthusiastic. I loved you. And now I have a factory. I build machines. I export all over the world. I build machines to wind wire. And he says, I thank you. It's all thanks to you. Thank you very much. Pif paf fui bom chik chak. And he smiled. He remembered my joke, my name. I said, who are these 2 guys? Oh, he says, they were also your students. Really, I don't recognize them. Yes, they both remember you. They are younger than you. This one is now a dental technician, and this one is a professor of agriculture at the Weizmann Institute of Technology. He's a professor. He decides which trees to plant where in Israel. Israel used to be a barren desert country 100 years ago. The Jews have planted millions of trees. Now Israel is green from end to end. They've learned even how to plant trees in the desert. We sat for 4 hours talking. We couldn't forget what we went through. They were all in Dachau with me, but I didn't know them then. Now they are having a good life, those who survived. What else happened in the ghetto? I'll tell you one more story. I don't have too much time. My little cousin was born just before the war, and the little girl was in the ghetto living in a room with 12 people, crowded conditions. Every morning, 10 people used to go out to work, and she and her mother used to remain. And her mother was cooking for 12 people, preparing food. And she was tired. So she asked me, Ellie, when you come back from school, talk to her, talk to that little girl. She's all alone. So I started to take charge of her. That child, a 2.5-year-old, was speaking fluently Yiddish. She lived with 12 people. It was noisy. She heard a lot. A smart kid. I used to take her out for walks. Every day she learned 5 new words. It was wonderful to see. I told her stories. I took her around. I started to feed her. I started to put her to bed, told her a story. She became my baby. At 15, I had a baby. I loved her. One day my uncle, her father said, they killed 10,000. They are going to kill us too. That's a plan. I must get my daughter out of the ghetto. So he writes secretly a letter to a friend of his, a Catholic, a young man. He was a journalist and a writer, a very nice family. He just got married before the war started. And before the Russians came in, actually. And he got a letter back from the wife of this man. And she said, I don't know where my husband is. The Russians arrested him before the Germans came. He was a Lithuanian nationalist. He didn't like Russia occupying Lithuania, and he said so. They killed him. She didn't know that. She said, I have no children. I'll take your girl. Where can I meet you? Uncle tells her, writes back, I work in this factory downtown. Come 12 o'clock, I'll talk to you. She comes there, he offers her. We had some money that we had hidden, that we didn't give away, some gold. He offers her some gold. She refuses to take it. No, I will not take anything from you. I have enough. Just the child. They made arrangements. One morning, my mother gave the child a big injection, knocked her out completely. They put her in a rucksack. Uncle put it on his shoulders and he went out to work with 25 men and 2 soldiers guarding them. It was a long way to walk, though they used to stop always under a bunch of trees. Uncle took his bag off and left his daughter behind a tree, and he went off to work. He turned back and he saw a man came and grabbed the bag and disappeared. And we got a message. The goods have arrived. The child was safe. The child was safe. I fell into a deep depression. I was missing my little girl. I was thinking how she woke up. Strangers, she doesn't know anybody. And they speak a language, she doesn't understand the word. They spoke Lithuanian, she spoke Yiddish. I couldn't forget her. I couldn't forget her. But 3 months later, after we got her out of the ghetto, soldiers came into the ghetto after all the people went out to work, the adults. They drove into the ghetto on big trucks and they went hunting for children. They went into every house, grandparents or some other people were there with the children were alone, running around. They grabbed kids up to the age of about 11. Mothers with babies, they grabbed the child from her. If the mother refused to give it up, they used to beat her. And then if they couldn't get the child out of her, they said, you go with the child on the truck. They took away some old people, some grandparents, some mothers went with the children. 3,000 children and a number of adults were taken out that morning, that day. They were killed the same day. When the parents came home and found that the children were gone, the cry that went up, I will not describe to you. Here is my little cousin with a brave young woman, Lithuanian Catholic woman, and her mother. Those 2 women took her in their apartment downtown where they lived. They didn't let her out for 4 months. After that, she forgot us, she forgot Yiddish, she spoke Lithuanian, and they could let her out to play with the kids. Anybody reported them, they would have been hanged immediately. It happened. But nobody reported her, so she survived, and my little cousin survived the war, thanks to that brave woman. We have honored her at Yad Vashem with a special certificate, and on a tree is mounted the name of a person who saved a Jew. What happened to us? We went to a train. Remember, we came out of the hiding and we saw a train. We thought maybe they didn't lie to us. They are taking us somewhere to work. We went to a train and the train took off. As soon as the train took off, the Germans burned down every house in the ghetto. Some 3,000 people were hiding like we were. They burned down the houses. The people either collapsed or under the houses, they were burned to death, or they came out and then they were shot. Too late, the train is gone. We came out just in time. If we had come out 2 hours later, it would have been too late. Luck, luck. The train took off. Crowded conditions, 200 people in a wagon. No water, no food, no facilities, no air. Terrible conditions. The train traveled overnight, and in the morning we stopped at the old border with Poland. Everybody out of the train, men to the left, women to the right. I didn't have time to say goodbye to my mother. 5 minutes later, my father and I back on the train, and the train took off. My mother, my aunt remained standing at the station here, which was taken to Stutthof concentration camp. Stutthof, a women's camp. It was not only a women's camp, but it was a large concentration camp. The men, all on the train, traveling overnight, still without water, we were parched. And we arrived in the morning, in the afternoon, next day, and they unloaded the train, and we went up to a gate, and it said, concentration camp Dachau, camp number 1. Dachau, now we are in Dachau. We knew Dachau, we knew about Dachau. Everybody in Europe knew about Dachau. It was the first concentration camp Hitler made in 1933 when he came to power. Later, he made copies of it all over Germany. We saw 2 rows of barbed wire, primitive, machine gun posts in the corner, and here, huts half buried in the ground, in the background, houses for the guards. When we saw the name Dachau, we knew we are in a very bad place. But we realized that this can't be the main camp of Dachau. It was too primitive. 2 long rows. This is taking a photograph after the end of the war, and some of the huts were already collapsed. But this was 2 large rows of huts. 3,000 men were hired here that came without train. We were here. We realized it's not the main camp of Dachau. Actually, it was about 50 kilometers away from Dachau. And here is the inside of a hut. When we arrived, the commandant was screaming and yelling and insulting us and hitting us. He could kill a man with his boots, and he showed us how all kinds of viciousness. People, we were told to undress and give up everything that we have, our luggage, in our pockets, nothing, keep nothing back. So people didn't want to give up some money they had, so they went to a toilet and they threw it in the so-called toilet. The toilet was just a ditch, and on top with a wooden structure. So the Germans realized there was money floating in the effluent. They picked out 10 people, including the head of the Kovno ghetto, Dr. Elkes, a very respected older man. They told them to undress naked, climb into the muck, pull out all the money, wash it, spread it out on the grass, and after it was dry, they burnt it. This was the end for Dr. Elkes. A few weeks later in the barrack with me, I was there too, he committed suicide. He took a pill, he had some. We were put in these barracks, sleeping on the hard boards, 25 men on one side and 25 men on the other side. No straw, no mattress, nothing. They took away all our clothes and they gave us striped uniforms and 1 blanket. And I spent 10 months in a hut like that. 10 months of torture, of labor, hard labor, 12-hour shifts, construction work, and total hunger. They gave us nothing to eat. When we used to come back from work, after 12 hours work, we used to get a bowl of soup. The soup was vegetable soup, parsnip soup, no taste, no meat, no fat, and 1 slice of bread for a whole day. In the morning, we used to get black water, cold coffee, without sugar. My friends, hunger is a very painful experience when it's a prolonged time. A man can work for 3 months without eating, but after 3 months, he has lost all his fat. The fat in our body is our energy store. After 3 months, it's gone. Only skin and bones is left. And hunger occupies the mind 24/7. You go to work, You walk on the ground, you look, maybe there's something to eat. You see a core of an apple. 10 men jump to get it. The soldier walking behind us hits me in the spine, the back, with the butt of his rifle. Get back in line. He nearly broke my back. You think the whole day of nothing but something to eat. And at night, you dream about food. I used to dream every night of my mother's Napoleon cake she used to make for me. You can look up on YouTube, there's a film called Elly Gotz Cake. You'll see the cake my wife makes now, which is from my mother's story. Hunger. When we were liberated, I weighed 70 pounds and my father weighed 65 pounds. We arrived there. They took us to work. They announced we need locksmiths, metal workers, tool makers. I picked up my hand. They took me to a pump station, 12 pumps, pumping cement to the building site, a giant building site. I worked in a pump station. I worked indoors. I had a good meister. He was very kind to me. He used to share with me some of his bread and potatoes he brought me once. I got my father to work in our workshop, saved his life. What did they bring us here for? Oh, I risked everything for food. Let me show you. I worked in a workshop, so I was able to make myself a special tin, a long one, that would hold a volume of about 2 liters. Our soup we used to get was 1 liter, up to here. I made this triangle that could fold up and I could carry it in my pocket, and this disc. My idea was to get a double portion of soup. So I went with an empty can, keeping in the pocket those 2 things, and I went up to the women. There were women, a small group of women worked in our camp for cooking. And she stood on a high stool and a big pot, and she used to take with a spoon, 1 soup spoon, and pour it into our dish. I came up with my dish, I held it up for her, and she poured in 1 liter of soup. Then I went sideways, I put in this on top, so you couldn't see there was soup underneath, and I went to the second kettle around, not the same woman, but another one, and I stood in line again, and I came up to her, and I lifted my can, and I held it, and I said, pour it in. She said, give it to me. And she grabbed the handle and took it away from me. Once she lifted it, she realized there is something in there. So she poked inside, turned over this plate, this metal plate, and she saw there was soup inside. She realized what I was doing. And I thought, that's the end of me. If she reports me, I will get 25 whipping, and then I die 3 days later in great pain. I said, that's the end of me. But she just looked at me and she gave me back the can. She said, don't do it again. But she didn't report me. That was kind of her. My cousin, a young man of 30, was beaten to death 2 weeks before liberation for something that somebody accused him of, which wasn't even true. I named my son after my cousin, Reuven. That was one thing I tried. I tried another thing once. I tried to get potatoes in the field. It was dangerous because we were working, our pump station was right next to the railway line, and the railway line was the border of the building site. My meister brought us once some potatoes, and he distributed to us. So I said to him quietly, I said, where did you get it? He says, in the field over there. Don't go there, they'll shoot you, because there were soldiers marching up and down the line. So at night shift, I looked out of the window and I watched the soldiers coming together and lighting a cigarette and exchanging a few words and marching off again. So I counted how long it took before they got back. Took a long time. I divided in two, took about 800 halfway. When they were very far away, I dived over the line. Even though there were lights there, they were far away. And I got into the potatoes and I dug up potatoes and I put my pockets full of potatoes. And I came back to the line and I watched them coming together. I counted my 800 and I dashed over the line. I had potatoes. My fellow prisoners saw what I did. They also want potatoes, but they were not counting. They just ran across the line. The soldiers saw them. They started to shoot in the air. They brought them in. They gave them a beating. No potato. So you see, anything you can do to try and get food. Here is what Monica Schäfer said about the concentration camps. While there were detention camps, where prisoners were kept against their will, these were work camps. The prisoners were kept as healthy and well-fed as possible in those terrible war years. She knows what it was like to be in Dachau, the cheek of it. But one mistake Monica Schäfer made. She didn't say it in Canada. She can say it in Canada. Nobody would say anything to her. She went to Germany to tell the Germans what's happening in this Dachau. She was arrested because in Germany there is a law. Don't deny the Holocaust, you go to jail. Monica went 8 months in jail in Munich. And when she came out, the judge said, "You are an anti-Semite and a liar. Don't say it again in Germany. I'll arrest you for 2 years." So she's back. Now she's in British Columbia, telling the same stories again, publicizing that the Holocaust is a lie. What can I do? What can I do? We are still alive and she's already talking. I think what will happen after? My friends, when you hear a witness like me, you are all becoming witnesses. When I'm gone, you are the witnesses. Why did they bring us to Germany? Germany was being bombed. This is an American bomber, a super fortress. They used to fly every morning over our camp, bombing Germany, 1-ton bombs. At night came the Lancasters from Britain, flying all night. We heard the roar. We never saw them, bombing Germany. Germans were dying and being bombed out of all cities. Germany was destroyed in the war. The Germans tried to shoot at them, and then the Germans invented a new jet, the first jet aeroplane was invented in Germany. It was called the Messerschmitt 262. This is a fighter plane that could fly 700 kilometers an hour. The British and Americans were flying at 360 kilometers. This guy could fly up to them and shoot them down before they saw him coming. Very hard to defend themselves from an airplane that flies 700 kilometers an hour. But the Germans couldn't build it because they were being bombed out, all the factories. So they decided to build a factory so strong that no bomb could go through. And this is the plan. They mounted a mountain of sand, a curved mountain of sand, 400 meters, almost half a kilometer long. They covered it with concrete and steel, 5 meters thick. 5 meters is double the height of a normal room, more than double. Then they dug out the sand. They covered it with steel and cement. They dug out the mountain of sand from inside, and they put in 4 floors of machine tools. The idea was to produce an aeroplane in mass production. Every few hours would come out an aeroplane. They never finished building it, but we died trying. Here is a construction site. You have never seen a building that size, never. Here is a soldier, here is a prisoner. Look at the size of it. Here they were digging out the sand. Here's another picture. 5 meters of metal put up and then filled with concrete. This whole space was being filled with concrete. Our people, I was pumping the concrete. I was one of the 12 pumps that were pumping concrete through big pipes. But our people had to stand summer and winter on these boards and they were holding a pipe which was hanging from a crane, pumping cement, and they had to move the pipe around. But the wind used to blow the pump sideways, the pipe. The prisoner would fall into the concrete and drown in the concrete. Drown in the concrete. One day I came home from work. I said, "Where's my friend? Where's Hatzkel?" "He fell into the concrete today," they said. He drowned in the concrete, buried forever, for eternity in the concrete. I found out after the war that the chief engineer said 12 people are drowned in the concrete. We stayed and we worked and we died. A third of the camp died. Over 800 people out of 3,000 died in those 10 months. My father was very close to death. I became very sick because not only did we not get any food, they also didn't give us any washing facilities. We were full of lice, and the lice were drinking our blood. Our clothes were full with thousands of lice. When we used to go with a nail, we used to hear them cracking one after the other. I got very sick one day towards the end. I went to the barrack, the hospital barrack. It was about 4 months before the end, actually. And I lay down in a bunk and I fell asleep with very high temperature, unconscious for 3 days. My father thought I wouldn't wake up. He used to come to visit me every day. I had fleck fever. It's a viral disease, spotted typhus, they call it. After 3 days, I woke up. My father came to visit me in the night. He came from the day shift. I said to him, "I'm so hungry. I would like an apple." I must have been delirious. How can you ask for an apple in Dachau? But my father went to the kitchen window. He knew a woman there who knew me. She was from my school. And he told her what I said. So she gave him 3 little green apples. My father brought it to me. She told him, "Go away from the window. They'll beat you up and they'll kill you if you stay here." He took a risk. He brought me the green apples. I asked him to eat one. No, I had to eat all 3. I survived. Then I became the doctor in the camp, in the hospital barrack, was my mother's boss. He was a surgeon. He was a professor of surgery. He had his own hospital in Kaunas before the war. So he knew me. So he said to me, "Don't go back to work. You are too weak. Stay here and you can work in the hospital barrack." So I helped. And then all kinds of stories happened. I haven't got time to tell you everything. I became an assistant to him in operations. He said, "We can't have operations, but the Germans insisted that we have an operating room." And he said, "We haven't got the instruments." So the German officer said, "Give me a list and I'll get you the instrument. You've got to have an operating room." So he gave him a list as long as his arm. 2 weeks later, I received 2 crates of instruments, everything we asked and more. I laid it out and the doctor said to me, make an operating room there. I said, "Where?" He said, "In the cupboard there. There was a big cupboard. Clean it out, make an operating room." So I built a bed out of wood, out of a crate, and I laid out the instruments. And every day the commandant came in and said, "Any operations today? I want to watch. Let me know." "No, not today." And the doctor said to me, "He's crazy. How can I operate on these people? They weigh 70 pounds. But one day he got a patient who had an appendix attack. The doctor said, "I'm going to operate. He'll die anyway, otherwise." So he announced to the German that we have an operation. And then he turned to me and he said, "Elie, you are going to be my assistant." I said, "Doctor, I know nothing about this medicine. I'm a mechanic. Why don't you get Dr. Berman?" "Dr. Berman," he says, he's an internist. Internists know nothing. You'll do it." I said, "I know nothing." He says, "Don't worry. You knew, your mother knew, and you will know. I get it via DNA, you understand? So he put me in there, and Dr. Berman, I discovered that surgeons don't like internists. Anyway, I laid out all the instruments. I said, you have to tell me what to do. He said, boil the gloves. We haven't got a glove disinfecting machine. Boil the gloves in water. So I threw the gloves in a pot of water and I boiled them. And he told the German commandant to come tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, we'll have an operation. He came, the doctor comes in, he says, the gloves. So I pull them out from the water with a tweezer. He says, how can I put them on? They are full of water. I said, I was also wondering. He says, you should have tied them up with the strings so they couldn't get water inside. I said, you didn't tell me. Oh, anyway, I dragged on the gloves on him and he put gloves on me. And we both go into the operating room. I've seen my mother do it, but I haven't watched operations. He said, don't worry, I'll tell you everything. Okay. He's got an audience, so my professor is giving a lecture. He was a professor at university. Now we cut the epidermis, he put the patient to sleep with an injection, and then he gave him started to cut scalpel number 1, I gave him. He cut clamp number 1, clamp number 2, clamp number 3. He opened him up, then he said, now I have to cut fat, but there is no fat here because these prisoners have no fat, so it's very simple. I just cut the inside lining of the stomach. Cut again, clamps number 2, clamps number 2, da-da. Now he puts his hand inside, everything pops out. I hope I'm not freaking you out there. And he pulls out the appendix. He says, this is, you see, it's all green and blue. So he tied it up and he cut it off and threw it away. And he pushed it back in and he asked again for the needle. And I gave him those curved needles, like a bow. And with a tweezer, he went with the needles. He worked amazingly fast. Tuck, 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 tuck. He sewed him up and put on sticky on top. And he sent him into the barrack. And that guy survived the war. And then we had a second operation, more complicated. Anyway, I assisted in 2 operations. What can I tell you? If your hospital is short of staff, let me know. We worked and we died. And one day they stopped work because the American army started to surround us. And they took us by train to Central Camp Dachau. This is a granddaddy of all concentration camps, my friends. 2 rows of barbed wire charged with 2,000 volts electricity. You touch it, you die. Anybody want to commit suicide? Touch the thing. If it doesn't shoot you, because this photograph is taken from the guard's center. He can see everybody going near the fence. 32 barracks. They were supposed to have 500 people each. They had 2,000. This camp was grossly overloaded because they brought people from all over. My father is dying. He can't walk, he can't talk, he's got swollen legs. We go into barrack number 2. My father says, I have to lie down. And I knew he's going to die in the next day or 2, and I don't know where my mother is. I was so upset. I tried to get him to be alive, stay alive, but I can see he already gave up. When you gave up, you die very quickly. No place to lie down. 4 bunks, one above the other. 4 shelves, covered with people, lying shoulder to shoulder, they are lying. No space to lie down. But they pulled out a dead body from the bottom bunk. My dad grabbed it first, he crawled in there. And I thought, I'll find him dead tomorrow morning. I was so tired, I fell on the floor and I slept. In the morning, my father is still talking to me. Noontime, they bring the soup. You have to go in line. My father can't get up. He gives me his dish. You get it for me. They won't give it to me. Try. I go in line. I said, that's for me and that's for my father. He's over there. They gave me 2 soup and 2 slices of bread, 1 slice of bread each. I go back to my father. He grabs the soup. People are shouting, the Americans are here, we are free. I said, I look out the window, I see a Jeep standing and an American soldier. I said, Father, we have made it because they promised us, we will never let you go. You will not be free no matter how the war ends because we are keeping the last bullet for you. But we have made it, I said, look, we are alive. My father said, that's very nice, that's good. Have you got the bread? I still holding his piece of bread. Have you got the bread? That was my moment of liberation. Have you got the bread? What can I tell you? I didn't go out to greet the people, the Americans. I sat with my father. Here is the Crematoria where they used to burn the bodies. There were 3 such ovens. I photographed it now after the war. I go there every 5 years. They couldn't cope. There were piles of bodies 6 foot high of prisoners lying, dead bodies, thin bodies, legs like sticks. The Americans came in, they saw it, they were shocked. Soldiers were crying. Here are the people came out to greet the Americans. I didn't go, I stayed there. I was still in shock with my father. But I was afraid my father would die. But you know, about half an hour later, he got hope. So he gave up on dying. He crawled out from the bunk and he said to me, so now what? Now what? We stayed for 3, I'll stop for a moment the sharing. We stayed for 6 months in hospital. 6 months, I went from 70 pounds to 120. 6 months of lying in bed all day, only going down to have a look downstairs if we can see a list of people who survived somewhere else. Where's my mother? Where's my aunt? My 3 uncles survived the war with me. We were in hospital. After 6 months, I was okay physically, but I wasn't okay. I was full of hate. I hated Germans. My plan was very clear, to kill Germans when I come out. About 2 months or 3 months after we were in hospital, we found my mother and my aunt alive in a hospital 500 kilometers away. So we went and we got them to us, and now we had the whole family, and I had my mother. I was so happy to see her. She looked bad, but she was emaciated, but later she recovered. My mother was a very beautiful woman at one time. And then my aunt went back to Lithuania to recover her daughter, and she found her and she brought her back to Germany. And we stayed, but I had a problem. I hated Germans and my head was full of nothing else except that. My plan was to leave hospital and kill Germans in revenge. And after a while, a good while, one day I said to myself, you can't kill anybody. You can't kill people who have not done anything. Not every German was a murderer. What's the matter with you? You must find the people who were the guards in Dachau. How can I find them? And I said to myself, am I a killer? I'm not a killer. I said to myself, I have to stop hating because it's killing me. It's taking up my brain. And when I stopped hating, I started living for the first time. To hate, I want you to remember that. To hate is like taking poison and hoping that the other would die. But the other won't die. We are poisoned. You know who said it? Buddha, the founder of Buddhism 2,700 years ago. He said, to hate is like taking poison and hoping the other would die. I tell it to every student I ever talk to. I gave up hate and life started for the first time for me. I remembered I want to be an engineer, and I haven't got education. I've only got grade 6. So I hid the books, mathematics, physics, science, higher mathematics. I learned everything. I wanted some help. So I found a German teacher who would help me. She didn't want to, she was busy, a high school teacher. I said to her, Madam, did you ever travel from Landsberg, where she lived, to Munich by train during the war? She said, yes. I said, did you see in the valley where you crossed, there was a camp there? She says, yes, I saw it. They looked very poor, those people there. I said, I was there. And now I need some help from you. I want to be an engineer. I want to go to university. Help me study. She said, fine, come inside. And she promised me twice a week she'll give me lessons. She taught me calculus. I learned it. I also took a course in electronics. I learned how to repair radios, and I loved it. I decided I don't want to be a mechanical engineer. I'm going to be an electronics engineer now. And I started to work on it. 2 years later, I was ready. My parents wanted to get out of Germany, and they were trying everything, but Israel was closed because it was still Palestine. Not till 1948 was Israel declared independent. And then 150,000 Jews went from Germany to Israel. Before that, we all sat in Germany because no country wanted us. Canada took 1,000 Jewish orphans, and they said, for Jews, none is too many. There's a book by that name. Look it up. America, only cousins and brothers and sisters could come. South Africa, where we had relatives, they wanted to pay for us to come. No, we don't want, they said, the government there. We don't want Jews or Catholics. We were in good company. A racist regime like you can't believe. So we can't go anywhere. But I didn't care. I was studying and I was ready. I went to university in Munich. I presented myself to examiners. Test me, I am ready. They gave me a 1-hour test, an oral test, and they accepted me at the university. I came home. Mother, I'm going to university finally. You are not going, my mother said. Why? We are leaving. We don't want. Where are we going? Nobody wants us. This was 1947. She says, we are going to Norway. Norway. The only country said they will take 900 Jews, so we signed up. We went to Norway. Our whole family, my 3 uncles, my aunt, and my cousin. We got our cousin back. I'll show her to you. As a matter of fact, let me show her to you. Here is my cousin with me in Germany after. My aunt went back secretly through 3 borders, and she brought her back to Germany. And here's my cousin now. She's 75, I'm 88. She lives in Norway, and I love her. She came to our 60th wedding anniversary, and she's very close to me. I have 3 children and 6 grandchildren, but she has a special place in my heart. So we went to Norway, and Norway, here's me and my mother in Norway. Norway was wonderful. They gave us everything. I learned Norwegian in 3 months because I wanted to get a job very quickly so I could study at night and get to university. I learned Norwegian very quickly. I got a job in Oslo, the capital, as a radio mechanic. At night, I went to night school. And my father writes to his uncle in South Africa, in Johannesburg, uncle, send some money. My son wants to be an engineer and he has to work. He should study full time. Uncle says, can't send money, not allowed. But now, if you come to Africa, I'll make sure I can send your son to university. So we went to Africa, not South Africa. They wouldn't take Jews. We went to Zimbabwe, Rhodesia it was called. It was a British colony. We got papers for there. We went to Rhodesia. We came to Rhodesia. Now I have to learn English. I didn't know a word of English. So I got myself into grade 12 with difficulty. They didn't want to take me. He can't speak a word. I said, let me sit in the back. Don't worry about it. 9 months later, I passed matric. I got a distinction in German. I was doing fine. I went to university. Here's my father in Africa, started to buy books. When he died in Toronto at the age of 86, he left me 2 rooms full of books. He loved books. He learned English so he could read Churchill's memoirs.
Hi, excuse me, Ellie. I am so sorry to interrupt, but we're not seeing your screen properly, unfortunately. Could you?
You're not seeing my screen? Oh,
no, I'm so sorry. If you could just.
Okay, new share. Let me do it again.
Yep.
I'm
Thank you.
sorry. Can you see it now?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry. Let me go back a few pictures. This is my cousin. Did you see? This is my little cousin in Germany. When they brought her back, she didn't know who I was, and I loved her. Here she is when she's 75, and I was 88. My cousin, this is my mother and me in Norway, and this is my father and I in Africa. He started to collect books. He left me a big library when he died. And now, after 4 years, I went to Johannesburg University and I graduated as an electronic engineer. I was so happy. I was so happy. My father was proud of me. I got to engineering. I went back to Rhodesia and I expected to get a good job as an engineer. No jobs for engineers. It was a primitive country. All they had was farms, farming. I don't want to be a farmer. So what should I do? I started to work by starting a business. I couldn't find a job. So I took a small store and I put an advert, radio repair. I didn't have to be an engineer to do that, but I learned it before. I started to take in radios, I repaired, I got some money, I made a big store, I put in my parents to sell. I didn't like retail. I started another company. I started a sound recording studio. And after a sound recording studio, I started another business. I was recording music, you see, for the Africans who love to sing and dance. And I started to make vinyl records. And then I started a business advertising to the Africans. I had an advertising company. And then I needed films. So I became a film director. I taught myself how to make films. In short, I was very busy. And I was having a good time. I was fishing on the Zambezi River. I caught this tiger fish with a pound of meat from a crocodile. How do you get crocodile meat? You shoot a crocodile, that's what. I became a crocodile hunter. We shot a lot of crocodiles. We sold the skin and he paid for our trip. I became a hunter, I had guns, I had everything. And later, I was riding horses. I learned how to ride horses. I was jumping horses. I was climbing mountains. I was having a good time while working. I was running 4 companies. And then one day I thought, I have to find a woman I could love all my life. So I went looking. Well, I had a good time looking, but I found her. This was Esme, my wife. We have now been married for 63 years. This month, March. And we are still in love. So it's not too bad to be locked up in an apartment. We have a wonderful time. We had 3 children in South Africa. I said, let's get out of Africa. Our kids will grow up racists. I can't stand this regime. The apartheid, the separation of the races, how they treated black people. I didn't want any part of it. We came to Canada. In Canada, we did well. We started a factory. 7 years, we worked very hard. Then I had money. So I bought an airplane. I became a pilot, my dream. I was flying the family to Florida and to Nova Scotia. Just enough for my family. My wife and 3 children sitting in the back. It was very nice. And we could even take the dog sometimes. And later, I learned how to fly gliders. I used to fly on business to Chicago and New York. I had a second factory in Chicago. We were doing well. Everything is good. Now we are retired. Here we had our 60th wedding anniversary in 2018 and my 90th birthday. We danced, it was wonderful. And the year before, in 2017, was Canada's 150th birthday, you remember? So the CBC said, what are you guys doing to remember the celebration? I told them, I will jump from an airplane. And I did. At 89, I jumped from a plane with a parachute with an instructor. Ah, that was exciting. So I'm coming to the end. Why do I come to tell you all these stories? Why do I tell about it? I want you to understand, first of all, the tragedy of the Jewish people. 6 million Jews out of 18 million in the world were killed. And we thought with that genocide, when the world has it documented and can see it, they will stop doing it. They haven't stopped. Rwanda, Africa, Asia, murders, people are being killed all the time. What is it with humanity that we fail? I want to teach students not to hate. That's the first thing. I want to teach people not to be prejudiced, not to believe all the stories about other people. Human beings have a problem. Anybody who is different to ourselves, we don't like them. Give it up. It comes from way back when we lived in the bush and the enemy was a guy across the river. We are not comfortable with people who look different, have a different color of skin, talk differently, have a different religion. Humanity has a lot of problems. We are brilliant as a race. Look at the things that we have done in electronics, even now, what we are doing here. It's amazing. At the same time, we can still hate. Canada takes in a lot of new people, refugees. I'm not asking you to love them. I'm asking you to be curious about them. Curiosity, find out who they are. You'll discover a common humanity. I want to finish with this picture of the First Nations. Our First Nations have also suffered quite a lot here from our settlement of the people from Europe. This is an elder of the First Nations. He's talking to his grandson, and he tells him, each one of us has in our chest two wolves that are fighting all the time. The wolf of love and friendship and the wolf of hatred and bitterness. So the grandson says, which wolf will win? The one we feed, said the grandfather, the one we feed. So I say to you, my friends, don't feed the bad wolf. Thank you very much. We'll have some questions now. Anyone with questions, please direct them and let me have them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elie. That was, wow, I was in tears at multiple moments, and I'm noticing from the questions and the comments in the Q&A that others are saying the same thing. I can't imagine how tiring it is to even talk about it and to relive it in this way. And I'm so grateful that you came to talk to us. And we have a few minutes for questions.
Yes.
So I'm reading from the Q&A, and I'll lump a couple together because there's some similar themes developing. And I guess the first theme I would lump under the concept of the human spirit, your spirit and your spirit of forgiveness. Andrew Barnes is interested in hearing how you felt about the German people as a whole in the years immediately following the war and liberation. And there's a second question about how you remain positive, what your thoughts are on human nature, and do you believe in a God given what you've been through?
Okay. Well, I have obviously, my initial hate was directed at Germans, all Germans, because they were the people who killed our people. Then I started to differentiate. I said, wait a minute, maybe they followed Hitler. Maybe they went to Hitler Youth, but they didn't kill anybody, so leave those out. Let's find the ones that are guilty. And then I found I can't find the people who are guilty. And then I decided that hate stops me from being who I am. And I gave it up. I'm amazed to this day. No psychologist ever spoke to me. But I did it on my own. I realized that my head was full of only one thing. Now we know that hatred creates enzymes, chemicals in the brain, which stops other things from coming in. At the same time, I want to stress, I did not forgive those Germans who did the bad things. Forgiveness is a separate issue. People, especially people who are Christians, often ask me, how wonderful that you forgave them. I said, no, stop a moment. I did not forgive those people who did those crimes. Because first of all, they didn't ask me. Secondly, I had no power to punish them. Forgiveness can only be meaningful if I have a choice. I can punish you or I can forgive you. Say it didn't happen. Nobody except one Nazi once asked me for forgiveness. I would love to tell you, but I haven't got time now. I met a Nazi who told me that he was a Nazi. And he basically asked me for forgiveness. But I asked him, did you do anything terrible? He said, no, I was a soldier. But I want you to understand, I became a Nazi, he says, because I was an idealist, not because I wanted to be a murderer. And I understood that young people can be misled by politicians who are wonderful speakers. And that is a danger. And that is why I speak. So people who don't ask for forgiveness don't deserve it because they haven't accepted guilt. So I don't forgive people just so. I have to have a choice and they have to ask for forgiveness. As for God, I've been an atheist from way back when, and I remained one. But I must tell you, I'm a Jewish atheist. I know Jewish learning. I know Jewish study. I know Jewish geography and history. I am very conscious of being a Jew. I even belonged to a synagogue, and I was even the president once. My mother-in-law said, you a president of a synagogue? The town will burn down. She told she didn't like it, that she knew that I was not a believer. But that doesn't matter. Jewish law is essential for society. And Jewish law has nothing to do with God so much as with instructions of how to live. We have given the world 2,500 years of history about how to live. And one of the things was, don't have slaves. 2,500 years ago, we wrote it down. Don't take a slave. If you have a slave, let him out after 7 years without pay, him and his family. When did the Western world give up slavery? In 1863 in England and 1865 in America. So it took 2,000 years to understand what the Jews have been teaching you. That's my answer.
Okay, there's a great question here about, and I know your passion for education. So Alexandria Henderson is asking about the trade school that you spoke of. And she notes, it seems to be shining a light in a terrible situation. Did this allow for a sense of self-empowerment where you had little power? And do you think productive and practical education is valuable to people in less extreme but ongoing refugee and war-torn situations?
It is essential. There are different skills for different people. Some people have an interest in matters which are essentially mental, study, like history, like your subject, right? This is not a matter of hands-on, it's history. And some people like auto mechanics or bookkeeping is the skill, or woodworking. And those people should utilize that skill because that skill is very important. Our country is very short of engineers. Not enough women go for engineering. I wish more women would come. And we are very short of trades. We don't have enough people for building, for metal work, for construction, for machine building. We have to bring in people from outside, and we need more entrepreneurs. Canada is short of entrepreneurs. I encourage entrepreneurship. I even give a lecture on entrepreneurship because it's essential in Canada to have more. So learning a trade makes you very happy, makes you self-assured as a person that you have a skill, and that skill is so wonderful. I get as much satisfaction from my handwork as I get from my engineering work.
Okay, so there's a few questions related to the legacy of the Holocaust and current problems in the world. And I'll start off with a question from one of the World War II history students, Derek, who's asking, he was reading your book and he noted that when you first started to speak about your experiences, particularly in South Africa, people were not necessarily willing to listen, and that you didn't speak about it for 25 years. So what Derek's asking is, what inspired you at that point? Was it a single event, or was it because an audience had developed that was ready and willing?
There was something in Canada, I must tell you. I started to speak in Canada. I went through 4 years engineering at university in Johannesburg. I never told any of my fellow students what happened. When I went back to South Africa to speak, and one of my fellow students came, he said, Elie, I spent 4 years with you. How come I didn't know? I said, because I discovered people don't want to hear it. When my father was telling them, our relatives, they said, Julius, don't talk about it. It's too painful for you. But what they meant is it's too painful for them to hear. They didn't want to hear it. So for 25 years, I shut up. But here in Canada, when Zundel came, it was a German guy who wrote a book, Did 6 Million Really Die? Here in Toronto. And he was publicizing it, and he was writing in a paper every day. We, the Holocaust survivors, got together. We said, we've got to do something about it. And that is when we started to go to schools and talk. So I started to talk only here in Canada. Before, I never talked about my experience.
Thank you. So there's a couple of questions here about current problems in the world. So I'll read you Mohammed's question. People say that genocide starts off with verbal, physical degradation of a particular group who is targeted. And people, like in current climates of certain countries, such as China and India, or the attitudes towards Muslims, some people think that's similar to the pre-Holocaust Nazi Germany. Do these attitudes worry you, or do you think people are exaggerating how far such attitudes can go?
No, I don't think so at all. In fact, I want to quote Voltaire. Voltaire said, anyone who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. Very important. Talk can kill. And the hatred of Muslims and hatred of Black people and hatred of Indians and hatred of people who are different to ourselves is so common, and it's so obvious that it's terrible, that the result is murder. I don't diminish the importance of any hate statement. I'm scared of it. Any hate statement to anybody. There is no question that there is an attack on Muslims in some places. Buddhists, who are supposed to be the peaceful people. But in Myanmar, they are killing Muslims. They killed hundreds of thousands. There is no exclusive right to justice. Justice must apply across everybody, every religion, every faith, every color of skin, every membership in a society. We are not out of the woods with genocide. We are not. I fear for the world. I fear for the world.
So thank you. As a follow-up, Marco, who's also a student in the World War II class, is aspiring to be a teacher. And he's asking, what do you believe is the most important thing for future generations to learn about the Holocaust and the survivors of the Holocaust?
First of all, I want to say that teachers are the most important parts of our society, not the business people, the teachers, because they are bringing the next, you people are bringing up the next generation. You have the biggest task for humanity as put on your shoulders, on the teachers, universities and schools. And I know hundreds of teachers in schools and quite a few in universities. It's very important to teach them not only the mechanics of life, but the ethics of life. Every teacher has to somehow, by example and by teaching, convey the commonality of human beings and the ethics of behavior. Ethics of the Fathers is called a big book in Jewish learning, Ethics of the Fathers. We have to learn and we have to teach to avoid prejudice and be careful not to use it in simple language. For example, I had an employee once here in Canada. He told me he tried to sell his boats and the guy, he Jewed him up. He Jewed him. I said, that's not nice to say. He said, why? I said, only Jews handle dishonestly? Oh, he said, I never thought of it that way. My parents always used to say it. I said, that's not good. You shouldn't use it. Okay, he said, you know, he gypped me. Oh, I said, that's also no good. He said, why? I said, gypsies are also not. Oh, he said, what can I say? I said, just say the guy screwed me up. What can I mean, it's part of language, right? We have a job to teach. Teaching is a very important and honorable occupation.
I often think about it in terms of empathy, how you can't necessarily teach empathy, but you can encourage people to try to live through the experiences of others and feel what they feel in order to build commonalities across different experiences, commonalities of emotion and of understanding. And I mean, your presentation has done a lot in that regard today. We're almost out of time, but I wanted to get in. Can I just tuck in a few more questions here?
Sure.
And to the audience, if I don't get to your question, please send it to me in an email, dneil@yorku.ca, and I will get them to Elie to answer. But there's two personal questions about your family. One is, how has your experience affected your children, and do they suffer from, there's new research on intergenerational trauma from the Holocaust, growing up in the shadow of the Holocaust and a parent's trauma. Could you speak a little bit about how your children have dealt with this?
That's an interesting question. You know, I decided early on, I'm not going to keep any secrets from my children. I told them everything from a young age, because I didn't want to have a black hole in my history that the children wouldn't know what happened. And I think it was a good decision, because my daughter, who is a psychotherapist, tells me that she now deals with second and third generation trauma because the parents didn't talk. But I thought I was out of in the clear because of my attitude. One day, my youngest, my daughter, who was already a mother of 3 children, said to me one day, Dad, do you know why as a child I was a bad eater? We had big problems with her. She never wanted to eat. My mother and my wife both had to work on her to eat something. I said, why didn't you eat? She said, because you were so hungry in Dachau. Ah, you can't win. You can't win. But I think it was best to talk. I felt very sorry for some people who said, my parents never told me anything. I don't know what happened to them. But it was a terrible thing that went out. They had no relatives. I kept asking, where are my grandparents? And they wouldn't answer. They said they are dead. You see? So that is an issue. But that issue is almost finished now. We are the last survivors here. Whatever damage we've done, we've done.
Okay, I think we're almost out of time, so I'm just going to ask one more question, because a really powerful part of your presentation was about aggressively countering Holocaust deniers and finding ways to become witnesses ourselves through listening to firsthand accounts and through telling stories like yours and others. So a question from Noor Aldib is, you said that we as listeners had become witnesses. So what can we do to continue your work against Holocaust deniers? And what do you think empowers a Holocaust denier such as Monica Schaefer?
We can't shut up Monica Schaefer in our society because we don't have laws that say you can't deny the Holocaust. And I don't think there should be such laws, quite frankly. I prefer the honest, open society of speech where anybody can say what they like and others should be able to oppose them. The need is to oppose them, to laugh them out of court, to write every time they write something or say something, that 20 people should come out on internet or wherever and say, you are wrong and you are lying because we have read the literature. The first thing you have to know is what happened. Many people are very ignorant. Some polls were taken where 60% of people have never heard of Dachau, have never heard of, didn't know that 6 million died. The schools failed in the past. They totally failed. In the same way as our schools in Canada failed to teach anything about the Aboriginal people of our country. My children learned nothing. I checked. I said, did you learn anything about the Indians, about the people here, the First Nations? Not a word, not a word. That's a big mistake. It's a failure. And it encourages prejudice because suddenly you see people who look a little different, who have a different style, a different philosophy of life, and you are not happy with them. And suddenly you find all kinds of things to say about them, which are not true about individuals, you know? So teachers themselves have to have a very open mind and have to have the knowledge, the information to teach. It should be part of the curriculum, not only the Holocaust, but prejudice in general, prejudice against other people. I don't want anybody in Canada to be diminished, whether they are Muslim or Jews or Christians or whatever. We have to, the schools have a big job. They have a big job. And the schools are the teachers and the teachers are the teachers' colleges that it started from early on. I must tell you that Germany has done the best job of the whole world to teach about Nazism. Every German goes through junior school and high school and learns about it. You can't become an officer in the army if you haven't attended at least one Holocaust center like Auschwitz or Dachau. They have to go there. I see them there, the soldiers come. They said, we have to be here. It's demanded. They call it working through history. Working through history is very important for a people. You have to know where you have been to know what you don't want to be. So you history teachers have an important job too.
So we're out of time. Again, I put my email I changed my name to my email for anyone who wants to email me with their question, and I will get it to Elie. I just want to say I've read your memoir as well, and I found it very powerful, but hearing you speak in person and just the strength of your spirit has been such a privilege. And I can see from the comments in the chat that many others are saying that as well. And we had, 120 people listening, and I'm so glad that your message and your spirit reach them in this real way. Despite the limitations of Zoom, your spirit comes through so beautifully. And I want to thank you, first of all, and Annette for facilitating this.
Yes, thank you, Annette.
And Carl Ehrlich, who's the head of the center, who wasn't able to be here, but was very disappointed about that, and who really stepped up with Julie at the center to help us. So, and to Calvin and David Kaufman, who are, we're really keen on bringing speakers into our, because as you say, telling these stories is so important if we want to integrate it into our curriculum in ways that create better and kinder citizens and caretakers of our collective past. So I can't thank you
Yes,
enough for being.
caretakers of our collective past. That's a very good sentence. Thank you.
We're all finished here, and again, send me an email, or if you just want to make some comments to Elie, I can get them all to him, and I'm sure he would love to hear from you and your feedback.
Yes.
As he put it, when I told him we were thinking about opening up to a larger audience, he said, the more the merrier. So please send your comments and questions, and we will keep the conversation going that way. So thank you to everybody for attending today, and have a great afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.